Welcome to EduCasts, home of EduCasters. In the sprawling landscape of educational psychology, there are a few giants that everyone knows by name. Pavlov with his salivating dogs, Skinner with his boxes and pigeons, and Thorndike with his puzzle-solving cats. These figures dominate the conversation when we talk about behaviorism. But sitting quietly in the corner, observing the scene with a sharp, mathematical eye, is Edwin Ray Guthrie. He isn't as flashy as the others. He didn't rely on complex statistical data or elaborate reinforcement schedules. Instead, Guthrie brought something refreshing to the table: simplicity. Guthrie's contiguity theory is often overlooked in modern crash courses on psychology, which is a shame because it offers some of the most practical, rubber-meets-the-road advice for teachers and parents. It boils down to a single, powerful premise. We learn by association. There are no bells and whistles, no cognitive maps, and surprisingly, no rewards necessary to cement a behavior. It is a theory that cuts to the chase, suggesting that if you do something in a specific situation, the next time you are in that situation, you will likely do the same thing. To really get a handle on how this impacts education, we have to peel back the layers of Guthrie's life, his radical stance on one-trial learning, and his famous 3 methods for breaking bad habits. If you are an educator, a parent, or just someone trying to figure out why you can't seem to stop checking your phone every 5 minutes, Guthrie has some answers that might just ring true. Edwin Ray Guthrie was an American psychologist born in the late 19th century, but his approach felt distinctively modern in its pragmatism. Unlike many of his peers who were obsessed with the why of behavior, looking for deep drives or complex cognitive processes, Guthrie was interested in the what. He was a philosopher by training before he turned to psychology, and that background in logic shows up in his work. He wanted a theory that was objective and observable. During the 1920s and 30s, behaviorism was the name of the game. The prevailing thought was that learning was a gradual process of strengthening connections between a stimulus, S, and a response, R. Thorndike called this the law of effect, suggesting that we learn things because they lead to a satisfying outcome. Skinner later doubled down on this with operant conditioning, where reinforcement, rewards, and punishment ruled the day. Guthrie looked at all of this and essentially said, "You guys are overcomplicating it." He didn't buy into the idea that you needed a reward to learn. He believed that the learning happened before the reward ever showed up. For Guthrie, the bond between the stimulus and the response was formed simply because they happened together in time and space. This is the heart of contiguity. It is important to understand that Guthrie wasn't saying rewards don't affect behavior. He just argued that they don't cause the learning itself. This might sound like splitting hairs, but in the classroom, it changes everything. It shifts the focus from, how do I reward this student, to what exactly is the student doing right now, and what cues are triggering it. The core principle, the law of contiguity. Let's get down to brass tacks. Guthrie's central postulate is stated as, a combination of stimuli which has accompanied a movement will on its recurrence tend to be followed by that movement. In plain English, if you are in a specific situation and you make a specific move, your brain links that move to that situation. The next time you are in that exact spot, you are wired to make that same move again. Think about a student, let's call him Leo, who gets stuck on a math problem. He feels frustrated, stimulus, leans back in his chair, and sighs loudly. Response. According to Guthrie, a link has just been forged. The next time Leo feels that specific frustration with a math problem, he isn't going to suddenly double down and focus. He is going to lean back and sigh. He has learned to sigh in response to the math struggle. Notice what is missing here? There is no reward for sighing. It doesn't help him solve the problem. It might even get him a dirty look from the teacher. But according to Guthrie, that doesn't matter. The learning happened simply because the stimulus, math frustration, and the response, sighing, occurred together. They were contiguous. This principle is deceptively simple, but it is also relentless. It implies that we are constantly learning, every second of the day. We aren't just learning when we sit down with a textbook or when the teacher says, "Pay attention." We are learning every time we react to the world around us. If a teacher asks a question and a student immediately looks down at their shoes to avoid eye contact, they have learned that behavior. The teacher didn't teach it, and the student didn't study it, but the bond is there. The controversy. One trial learning. This is where Guthrie usually loses people who are stuck in the practice makes perfect mindset. Guthrie proposed that learning happens in one trial. Now hold your horses. I know what you are thinking. If learning happens in one trial, why do I have to practice my free throws 1,000 times? Why do my students need to do 20 algebra problems before they get it? Guthrie wasn't blind. He knew that mastering a skill takes time. But he made a crucial distinction between a movement and an act. A movement is a simple muscle contraction or a tiny discrete behavior. Flexing your finger, shifting your gaze, moving your tongue to make a TH sound, these are movements. Guthrie believed these are learned in one shot, full stop. An act, on the other hand, is a complex collection of thousands of movements. Shooting a basketball is an act. It involves planting your feet, bending your knees, aligning your elbow, flicking your wrist, and focusing your eyes. Each of those tiny components is a movement. So why do we need practice? According to Guthrie, practice isn't about strengthening the same bond over and over again, as Thorndike thought. Practice is about attaching the correct movements to a vast variety of cues. When you are learning to drive a car, you aren't just learning one thing. You are learning to steer when it's sunny, when it's raining, when the radio is on, when a passenger is talking, when you are tired, and when you are alert. Each of those is a slightly different stimulus situation. You need to practice so that you can attach the act of safe driving to every single one of those varying conditions. This perspective is fascinating for educators. It suggests that when a student forgets a lesson, it's not that the neural pathway degraded. It's that the student hasn't yet associated the correct response with the new context. Maybe they can do the math problem on the whiteboard, context A, but not on the test paper, context B. The job of the teacher, then, is to ensure the student performs the correct behavior in as many different contexts as possible. The role of reward and punishment, or lack thereof. Guthrie was a bit of a rebel regarding the law of effect. He didn't believe that a reward stamped in a behavior. He argued that a reward works only because it changes the situation. Let's go back to our puzzle box. If a cat presses a lever and gets food, Thorndike says the food strengthens the lever-pressing behavior. Guthrie says, no, not quite. Guthrie argues that the cat presses the lever, the door opens, and the cat gets out to eat. The getting out and eating part changes the environment. The cat is no longer in the box. Therefore, the last thing the cat did while in the box was press the lever. Because the situation changed immediately, the cat didn't have a chance to do anything else, like scratch the wall or meow while in the box. The bond between being in the box and pressing the lever is preserved because no new bonds could interfere. The same logic applies to punishment. This is a tricky area for teachers. We often think that if we punish a student, they will stop the behavior. Guthrie warns us that punishment is a double-edged sword. He famously said, "We learn what we do." If you punish a student and the punishment causes them to cry, get angry, or withdraw, that is what they are learning to do in the presence of that stimulus. If a student is talking in class and you yell at them and they freeze up in fear, you haven't taught them to listen, you've taught them to freeze. For punishment to work, Guthrie argued, it must be applied while the stimulus is present, and it must cause the student to perform the incompatible, correct behavior. If a dog chases a car, hitting it after it comes home is useless. The dog just learns to fear you when it comes home. But if you can interrupt the chase while the car is there and make the dog sit, then the dog learns to sit when it sees a car. It's all about what is happening right now. The timing is everything. Perhaps Guthrie's most enduring contribution to education is his practical advice on breaking habits. Since we learn by doing, unlearning a bad habit basically means relearning a new response to the same old cue. You can't just erase a habit, you have to overwrite it. Guthrie outlined 3 specific methods to achieve this: the threshold method, the fatigue method, and the incompatible response method. These are gold dust for classroom management. 1. The threshold method. This is sometimes called approximations or gentle exposure. The idea is to introduce the stimulus at such a weak level that it doesn't trigger the bad response. Then, you gradually increase the intensity. Imagine a student who has severe anxiety response about reading aloud stimulus. If you force them to read a whole page in front of the class on day 1, you are just reinforcing the terror. The bond between book and panic gets stronger. Using the threshold method, you might have the student read a single sentence to you in private. The stimulus is weak. The panic doesn't trigger. Once they are cool with that, you have them read a paragraph to a small group of friends. Then, eventually, the whole class. You are sneaking the stimulus in under the radar, allowing the student to maintain their composure, the desired response, while the stimulus grows stronger. It's like boiling a frog, but for a good cause. 2. The fatigue method, exhaustion. This one is a bit more aggressive, but it can be effective. The premise is simple. Force the subject to perform the unwanted behavior over and over again until they are so tired of it that they stop. At that moment of exhaustion, they are still in the presence of the stimulus, but they are now not doing the behavior. They are resting or relaxing. That new response, resting, gets linked to the stimulus. A classic example involves a horse that bucks. The cowboy rides the horse and lets it buck until it is physically incapable of bucking anymore. The horse eventually stands still while the saddle is on. The lesson learned? Saddle equals standing still. In a classroom, it's risky, but think of the child who likes to make paper airplanes. A teacher using the fatigue method might make the student stay in at recess and make 500 paper airplanes. By the time they are on number 300, it's no longer fun. It's a chore. They eventually stop making them in disgust. The stimulus, paper, is now associated with not making planes. 3. The incompatible response method. This is generally the most useful and humane method for educators. The goal is to present the stimulus while simultaneously ensuring the student is doing something that makes the bad behavior impossible. You can't be sitting down and running around at the same time. You can't be singing and talking to your neighbor at the same time. If a student has a habit of shouting out answers without raising their hand, the teacher needs to trigger a behavior that is incompatible with shouting out. The teacher might say, "Everyone, put your finger on your lips and give me a thumbs up if you know the answer." You physically cannot shout out if you are effectively holding your lips shut. Well, it's harder anyway. By forcing the incompatible response, silence, thumbs up, in the presence of the question, stimulus. The old habit of shouting out is overwritten.